Hey, welcome to my channel. This is going to be officially episode 1 of my podcasting journey. My name is Ryan Quintero. I have my good friend Curious George behind me. We're going to be curious about a lot of different subjects as this channel progresses. I hope that you can join us on this journey. Today, we're going to be curious about why certain people get married while others don't. And the premise behind this has a lot to do with spirituality and different laws behind what Darwin perpetuated in that saying, survival of the fittest. Now, I don't really believe in a lot of Darwin's theories, and survival of the fittest doesn't really apply in the human kingdom as much as it does in the animal kingdom. I can see it and agree in the animal kingdom outside of humans and Homo sapiens that is valid. However, we as a species have evolved to a point where we play by a different rule set. And that different rule set essentially entails the fact that we no longer have to be fighting each other for mates. We no longer have to scourge for food, and we're not living a hunter-gatherer lifestyle anymore. What it actually is a spirituality. So going back to my example, in the animal kingdom, in the plant kingdom, the plants that are most likely to reproduce are the ones that are located centrally amongst a large variety of other plants. They're located amongst many other plants, and that gives them the best chance of connecting with other plants, essentially mating, reproducing, and having offspring. The same can be said about the animal kingdom, where if an animal is born in a very rural place, let's say, for example, a snow leopard, these snow leopards don't have a lot of other snow leopards in their vicinity, so the chances of them mating and actually producing offspring is like a once-in-a-lifetime occurrence, and it's very rare for their species. Where ants, for example, there's millions of ants in their own geographical location, so it's very easy for them to find other mates, and obviously they have a queen colony. But regardless, you kind of catch my example of the more available a potential mate is, the more likely you are to reproduce, get connected, and have offspring. Now, in the human kingdom, the situation is a little bit different. Like I mentioned earlier, we have evolved past the need for such type of geographical locations and having many different types of people. So you can't really say that people who live in the city have more chances than people who live out in more rural areas. That's just not true due to technology, which has connected us immensely. The technology in today's day has connected us online. We have swipe apps for dating. We have social media where you can talk to people in other countries, other states, or no problem. You can travel. We have vehicles, cars, planes, who knows what other things are going to be released in the future. We can space travel across the planet maybe in 6 seconds. So there has to be something that correlates here. And my premise is that it is a spiritual place of abundance that certain people can find themselves in order to be more easily able to get married. And what I mean by that is there's different levels of spirituality in which we live. And the people who have what I would consider a more simplistic view of their spirituality and their thought reasoning processes, they're more likely to easily find a spouse and mate and produce, marriage and offspring and children. So what's great about that is that they have the benefits of being in a place where they can easily find somebody to connect with, because their spiritual plane is in the most simplistic level. I'm going to break down these spiritual planes into 4 levels. I'm going to call them the arithmetic level, the algebraic level, the infinitesimal level, and the theoretical. All right, so we're going to get into that a little bit later in the podcast, but going back to the first level, the arithmetic level of spirituality, these are the people who, in their thought process and in their reasoning, 1 + 1 = 2, 1 - 1 = 0, so on and so forth. It's a very simple way to make decisions, and in essence it's also the way that the majority of the population would live, because it is the most realistic, it's the most truth-filled, and it allows people to easily connect with others in that space. Their reasons for doing certain things are simple and can be easily understood by others. And because of that fact, they're more likely to find somebody to get married to and have children with. Going back to my example, now I want to take it a step further to the algebraic level. These people have a variable in a lot of their decision-making processes where 1 plus 1 still equals 2. However, there's going to be an x factor. So it's going to always be a 1x plus 1. And you would have to deduce what that x factor is in order for a good connection to happen. Sometimes this X factor comes into play as it relates to a past trauma. A past trauma has come into their life and it results in a need for reasoning a certain subject matter in a different way, or it could just be a positive factor, like an agreement that they've made that states, hey, I'm only going to be compatible with people who have the same sense of humor as me. I spend a lot of time watching comedies and learning about humor, and if somebody doesn't have the same level of humor as me, then I just don't want them, and that's okay. And that's what's great about being at this higher level of spirituality. It's not to say that there's a hierarchy here, because as you know, there's benefits to all levels, and being at the simplest level of reasoning in that arithmetic spiritual plane where 1 plus 1 equals 2, you have the most chances of finding a mate, and that's a great thing. The difference here is that these people are more selective. As you get into the algebraic level, you become more selective in who you want to be with because there are certain X factors that don't line up. Majority of the time, I would want to say that it's something positive, but sometimes it's an underlying issue that needs to be resolved. You can't really determine what the X factors are. All it really states is that it's more difficult for somebody to line up and connect with another being just because their reasons for doing things have a variable that you would have to discover along the way. And that's going to make it a little bit more of a challenge. You know, like I mentioned, some of the examples are this person has a very specific type of humor, and if their potential spouse or girlfriend or boyfriend or whoever doesn't have that exact type of humor, they're going to have a more difficult time getting connected and actually moving on to the next level. Going back to the arithmetic area of society, those people who have a very simplistic view of their spirituality, it's a good place to be, especially if you're trying to find somebody and kind of connect. Now, it's not to say that those people who have that algebraic or infinitesimal level of spirituality cannot find and connect with somebody who has a more arithmetic level of spirituality. The only difference there is that, well, one, they'd have to make a conscious choice to either grow or settle. So it could be, if that X factor is a negative, they would have to grow and find out what that trauma is that's kind of becoming a hindrance for them to be easily compatible and connecting with somebody else. But if it's something that is a positive thing, like the humor example that I mentioned before, it would be a case of settling. And as you know, we as humans, the one thing that I know across the board is that we tend to refuse to settle when it comes to a mate. We always want to be with the best, whether we're looking for the most attractive, the most knowledgeable, the most strong and intelligent, whatever it is that we want the most that we could possibly get based on who we are as a being. And so that's why, in a lot of senses, those people who have the algebraic or the infinitesimal level of spirituality aren't going to be settling for those who do not. To go back and explain a little bit more about what those different levels are, again, you understand that the algebraic level of spirituality just basically means that, hey, 1 plus 1 equals 2. If I go to work, I get money. If I have money, I'll be able to get a spouse. If I get a spouse, I'll be happy, and so on. And it's not to say that being financially or not is the only determining factor. There's a lot of factors that are involved, why somebody chooses to get married or not. But somebody who would have a more higher level of spirituality in the sense that their spirituality is algebraic or infinitesimal, they're going to want to have a couple more conditions be met before they decide to settle on somebody. And sometimes the more elevated that spirituality becomes, the more difficult it can be for somebody to find a mate. That's why you have certain individuals that you only hear of meeting somebody down later in life, the George Clooney's, etc., etc. People who get married quickly and end up in divorce, usually it's because they chose to either settle and they didn't have somebody who met their criteria in terms of their spiritual level, as explained in these 4 levels, or they thought that they could ascend to a different type of reasoning to connect with somebody. Either way, one party is doing a settling in that sense where they're deciding to bring it down to a more simplistic, just for the sake of companionship. And I highly don't recommend that. I recommend against that, because what you don't want to have happen is you marrying the wrong person. So I'm going to continue to explain these 4 levels just for the sake of this discussion. So we already understand the algebraic reasoning, where 1 + 1 = 2 in the spiritual way that we decide to make our decisions. And the algebraic, it's 1x + 1 = 3, for example, where we need to figure out what that x variable is, whether it's I have a particular sense of humor that is very unique to me. It's always a unique factor. That's what the algebraic is. It's a uniqueness that is specific to that one individual. It is something that cannot be easily altered. Once you've gotten to that place, you will have a very difficult time going down in a hierarchical level, especially if it's a positive thing, because you will always assume that this thing, this X factor, is something that has made you a better person, rather than something that is actually maybe hindering you from finding a potential spouse. It's the great irony and the paradox in this whole thing. That's the paradox of the whole situation, that when you get to that more complex level of spirituality and reasoning and decision making, it becomes more difficult for you to find somebody, even though you believe that you have become a better person for it. And it's not to say that you aren't. It's just a great balancing that I believe God has set in place for humankind. Going forward now, to explain the infinitesimal, this is kind of like your calculus level reasoning. And this is a more difficult scenario to understand because there's multiple variables. And it's to say that certain things don't make the easiest sense because it's no longer about humor or just one factor. It's something specific to you that you believe is going to be a big factor in your reality and your worldview. It can be an example like if you wake up in the morning, you have to do this specific order of tasks, or else your day will be completely kaput. And depending on how much weight you put onto that, it kind of results in almost an OCD pattern, especially what you believe the results of your day being if you do not do these specific sets of tasks. Because if you were to say, hey, if I don't wake up, brush my teeth, and take a shower in that order, then my day's gonna be a little bit slower. That's not really an infinitesimal level of thinking yet. That's still like an algebraic level where you have something specific happening in your world, and if that doesn't line up with someone else, they're not gonna be like happy, or if they try to hinder that, you're not gonna be happy. The thing that I'm speaking about on this third level is where that pattern influences further decisions. That pattern influences actual things that are not really easily measurable. It's to say that if I don't brush my teeth and then shower in that order, then I can only eat this type of food for breakfast. I can only eat bagels with cream cheese for breakfast because I didn't do A and B. And that's just a simple example to explain this level of spiritual reasoning. I'm not using this as the example in reality of what this would be, this person who has reached this infinitesimal level of spiritual reasoning, they're going to see decisions as something very specific to them that when explained to others is infinitely out of reach and grasp of understanding and acceptance. So it becomes difficult in a sense for these people, but at the same time, if you have a good grasp on the balancing factor that is keeping you grounded as well as elevated into the state of spiritual reasoning, then you should be able to get away with it, and it should effectively make your impact on this world much more impactful and effective overall. So I hope that is a clear explanation of this infinitesimal level of reasoning. The highest level then going further is the theoretical. And this theoretical level is very seldomly attained by individuals. I believe personally that this level can only be granted by a higher being. And in my belief system, God is the only one who can really give you access to this level of spiritual reasoning. And the theoretical, and the reason being is because this is when we have permission to start to bend the norms of reality and physics to suit the needs of our beliefs and reasonings. You've heard many people try to get to this level in terms of different schools of thought, different schools of meditation, and different ways to kind of try and be that individual who can, mind over matter situation. But in essence, if you're living in that realm, most people would consider you to be very, very strange, consider you to be perhaps heavily with a mental disorder, unless it's been granted to you by God and you have that super solid foundation, because ultimately this level of spiritual reasoning does not compute with any type of reasoning that exists in an understandable plane. Even the infinitesimal level of reasoning is very difficult for somebody to understand and accept when you explain it to others. It's a very nuanced way of making decisions that is very specific to an individual, that states things are going to be this way because these things are this way. And if you explain them to somebody, the things that are to be the effect really have very little to do with the cause in these situations. So that's kind of my explanation of those 4 levels, and I hope that you caught that. If you have any questions about it, feel free to put it in the comments section. I'd love to have more dialogue on these. Again, the 4 levels are the arithmetic level, the algebraic, the infinitesimal, and the theoretical. Going back to our discussion earlier about why certain people have higher chances of getting married than others. That's kind of what my overarching theme of today's podcast is. It goes back again to that idea that is perpetuated in survival of the fittest. However, in my example, survival of the fittest for finding somebody has a heavy influence. I would say the majority of influence on how readily available is a potential mate. How many potential mates are in your circle, in your area of influence? And since human beings have evolved to a point where we're not one tree in a forest or one tree in a meadow surrounded by a forest, where it's difficult for that one tree in the meadow to actually connect with the other trees of the forest, we are human beings where we can easily pull our phones or our cars and travel to a place where other potential interesting people who are at our level are easily available. What actually becomes the factor is, where is your spiritual abundance and that level of the hierarchy that I explained. So you have the people who more often and more easily are getting married, living in the arithmetic level of spiritual reasoning, because they can simply make decisions based on what they believe is the best situation. What they believe to be is very easily understood by others. And because their reasonings and their spirituality is easily understood by others, the majority of people live in this place. It's a more common place, obviously. It's the base tier of this hierarchy. And so it's easy for these individuals to go ahead and connect and meet with somebody. Whereas somebody who, and that's a beautiful thing. I think that in itself, it is a paradox, and I don't want anyone to view that as negative or, hey, he's saying that I'm spiritually dumb or like I'm not on a high level spiritually. No, that's not it at all. I'm saying that you found it to be the most beneficial for you to make your decisions and to view your spiritual world as easily understandable to you and simple, where things don't need to be overly complicated. And that's going to give you the highest sense of self-worth, which is a great thing. It's also going to give you the highest chances of meeting a potential spouse, which is a great thing. Going to that next level, the algebraic level or the infinitesimal level above that, it's going to be more difficult for these people to settle and meet somebody because they have a little bit more niche reasons for why they do certain things. There are reasons for why this plus this is going to be a little bit more specific to their experiences, a little bit more specific to their traumas. And they would either have to overcome those traumas to get back to an algebraic level, or they would have to accept these things as making them better and be patient, not settling for somebody who can also match that level and match that experience in spiritual reasoning. I hope that makes sense. We're pretty much going to wrap up today's podcast with that. George, do you have anything to comment? All right, great. So guys, again, this is my first podcast. I'm really excited to kind of go down this journey. I hope you enjoyed it today, and leave a like, leave a comment, give me suggestions on how to improve things. I'm open to a lot of suggestions. I'm going to be posting this primary video on YouTube, so look for the channel. Then I'm going to be posting snippets on the best material, the best parts on all the different sites, promoting my company, Consultation X. Consultation X, what we do is we help individuals find coaches in their area of life that they need an expertise and an expert's advice. So check us out, consultationx.com. Find a life coach in 7 areas, including money, health, career and business, academia and job placement, travel, and relationships, as well as other types. So go ahead and check us out. Again, drop a like on this video and leave a comment in the comment section. Thanks so much, guys, and you have a wonderful, blessed day.